And like we did previously, I'd like to open up the questions to the presenters themselves if they want to ask. Any questions of their fellow presenters during this session?
Ken, what's next? Which of those, you mentioned a bunch of things, which is the most burning?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're working on a model that employs Euclidean distance for those three factors, which I know nothing about, but Josh is very, very smart with. So basically, it's a more elegant statistical model to generate a metric for the distance between those three variables and other comparable players. So it looks promising.
What are you going to do to try and isolate that, potential chicken and egg problem with the fact that the players with the height might just be players who get favorable treatment?
Yeah, that's a really tough one to do. So for example, my second test, the one that had lower games played but higher points, actually 40% of the players that I drafted were never drafted at all. So there's a huge question around whether or not you just pick bad players, or you pick players that never had the opportunity and the team's never invested in the development. So that question, whether it be for small guys or my example here with the huge defense and then never got a shot, it's still the same problem. And you start to see this more and more so when you see it follow up in their career, when you see that, play 15 years in the top European teams. So it's a tough one to prove. I think we also see the game getting faster and a higher importance on skill, which is great from a pass perspective. I think those roles of the goons are they're dying breed, except for my team that wants to resign Derek Dorsett for no apparent reason. But other than that, it's a very tough one to prove that premise. We're working on it.
Cam, are you worried that even if you identify the bias at the NHL scouting level, that you might just leave yourself with bias at the lower levels? That possibly the players, like it could be that junior levels, the taller players, the larger players are the bigger players because of previous bias.
Oh yeah.
Because they only got that far because of bias is on the part of people lower. Well, so that removing your bias from the NHL level bias might not even help.
Well, and that absolutely, I would encourage you to all attend junior games if you will, because the guy you will naturally notice is the guy that's 6'3" playing against 16-year-olds. Of course, he's going to look like he dominates because he's a man playing against boys. And that's like this is I think you just had that comment about your eyes lie to you, right? And it's very, very true, and that's why we kind of started to strip it out and really focus on points per game. But that said, I do think, at least historically, it is tougher for guys that are 5'9" to have successful careers, and the bias works the other way. As statisticians or analysts, we'd see a Donnie Goudreau and a Martin St. Louis. We'd say, look, you can do it. Well, yeah, of course, it's very rare circumstances where they can. So it's you're right. I mean, but I think as the broader hockey world moves to more emphasis on skill, I hope we'll see that bias transcend the other leagues that I've looked at.
So we have a couple of questions on Twitter that I'm going to ask of a couple of the presenters here. The first one is directed to Eric, and it's from inside the room here. So did you consider home and road in your work? And because basically the writer says if you're trailing in series, you probably lost on road and are now at home, right?
So yeah, it's something I thought a lot about because that was an obvious thing that I thought might have skewed the data. But the way I thought about it, I mean, especially one game deficits can kind of happen in any situation. So you could be home and road basically an even amount of times. If you're down by one game, it's not that big of a deal. If you're down by 3 games, if we're presuming that the home team in the series is the more likely team to be up 3 games, which I think is a safe assumption, you're bound to be playing that 4th game on the road. So that wouldn't really affect it in the way that the question is implying. The situation that I thought a lot about was 2 games because obviously teams quite often will be down 2-0 going home. So I thought maybe that 3rd and 4th game, you're down in the series, it's going to look a lot more like those numbers might be skewed. But if you think about it, the only ways you can be down 2 games in the series are either down 2-0 or 3-1. And if that better team is up 3-1 in the series, they're coming home rather than going on the road. So I think it kind of evens out in that sense. You're either down 2-0 and you're going on the road, or you're down, or sorry, if you're either up 2-0 and going on the road, or you're up 3-1 and coming home. And those instances probably cancel out to an extent. So I don't really have mathematical proof of the fact that there isn't a bias going on there, but my logic tells me that there wouldn't be sufficient bias there to skew the results particularly.
So Eric, you mentioned that you were looking into home road, and you mentioned you were also looking into using score-adjusted metrics for the individual game. Just off the top of my head, the home and road difference is reasonably small, smaller than the changes that you noticed with the adjustment metric that you did use. But the individual, like up 1 to up 2 score effect differences are quite a bit larger than that effect. So I think you might find your results either get washed out or could become very compelling.
Yeah.
If you do that, and so I think you should.
Okay.
And here's a hypothetical question regarding your presentation, Micah. Hypothetical, takeaway intermission, do score effects dissipate or lessen?
Takeaway what?
Intermission.
Oh, intermission. I'm not sure. There's definitely, I read somewhere now, it's terrible, I can't remember who, something about especially goal rates going up towards the end of periods. That shooting percentages strengthen, especially very late in period, which strongly suggests that coaches that periods are about as long as they can be without causing, very, very different changes in behavior. So I would say if you're going to take the intermissions out, you probably have to do it all again. Like you have to do all your analysis again. It's kind of like that would be the kind of hypothetical that you would not make. That would not be a small permutation of the data that they would go like this. It would be no idea.
Is that question pointing towards the coaches making tactical changes at the intermissions, though? I mean, the coach going into the third period might say, "Hey, let's play conservatively going into the third."
It could be. My intuition suggests that would be a smaller effect than just pure fatigue effect. That at the beginning of a period you've been resting for 15 minutes, and at the end of the period you definitely haven't. I guess you would just have to measure both and see which one is bigger somehow.
Okay, for the next 5 minutes, we'll go ahead and take questions from inside the auditorium, and we'll start right here.
So you looked at height with a statistically significant effect on draft options. Were you looking at actual height or NHL.com height?
That is an excellent question. We did talk about that a little bit when we first delved into this topic online, but yeah, I think, and Josh touched on it a little bit in Ottawa as well. You noticed there's not a lot of players listed as 5'11", which correlates with not a lot of men listed as 5'11" on dating sites, I understand. There's questions about the legitimacy of the height data. That is absolutely a limitation in our trial, for sure.
Okay. Thanks.
I'll just yell. Micah, I was going to ask, with score effects, we're there as well. The general trend seems to be in the +1, -1, +2, -2 situations. It's both in increase, we'll go down. So when teams are down, there's both an increase in shot attempts for as well as a decrease in shot attempts against.
Yes. And
what do you think would be kind of the main driver behind it? Because again, if you're a team that's up to, you're trying to shut it down or secure the game. You would be happy to give away or to reduce your shots for, but you're trying to defend shots against. So is it like a mutual exclusivity? The fact that because one team is doing more shots for, the other team doesn't have the time to do more shots against, or
so there's that last effect that you mentioned is definitely present, and there's an opportunity cost to everything that happens. At every moment of ice time that's occupied with one thing is a moment of ice time that cannot be occupied with a different thing, and that sounds really, really banal, but there's only so many seconds in the game, so you really can't just eat up minutes. That's even doing almost nothing. That's a valid defensive strategy. But I suspect that there's a substantial amount of thinking that suggests that teams are trying to limit goals against by limiting the quality of shots against. that is not working the way that they want it to. How that effect you mentioned is important, and I wouldn't put my name on anything quantitative about that second point until I'd worked out how much, like the relative importance of those two factors. But I think both of those factors are definitely present.
Okay, I think actually, I'm sorry, we're going to cut off the question. That doesn't mean you can't ask it, right? Because we are going to have the breakout sessions again downstairs.